For your close-up, Mr. DeMille.
Pardon?
That's just we're recording now. So today's date is Wednesday, February 13th, 2019.
Yep.
We are at the Cherry Hill Public Library in the Historical Commission Room. Sir, would you introduce your name, please?
Yes.
And spell your name, please.
My name is Albert F., middle initial F. My last name Guretse. It's spelled G-U-R-E-T-S-E. Guretse.
And when were you born, sir?
I was born September the 2nd, 1923.
What is your current address?
Current address is living at Cadbury, which is at 2150 Route 38, Cherry Hill.
My name is William Woodworth. I am a reference librarian here at the Cherry Hill Public Library, and I will be conducting this interview today. I'm going to ask you first which branch of service you were in, as well as your unit designation and what war you served in as well.
I was in World War II, and I was in the Army, and I started out in the finance division, but overseas I got transferred out of the finance into the Combat Engineer Battalion, 168th Engineer Combat Battalion.
What is your highest rank that you achieved?
Highest rank was technician 5th grade. Didn't get anything more than that. That was it.
And where did you serve?
I served when we first went overseas, we landed in Ireland. And I was with the finance dispersing section at that time. And we spent about 6 months in Ireland. And we left Ireland and flew to England. And from England, we shoved off onto the continent.
Okay.
And,
Yeah, we'll be talking about some of the areas that you saw a little bit later on here.
mm-hmm.
Now, were you drafted or did you enlist?
I was drafted.
Okay.
Yep. I was only 20 years old. And I had just started working. I had graduated from Lansdale High School in 1941, and I got a job as a bookkeeper because I had the commercial course in high school, so I knew a little bit about accounting and bookkeeping and so on. So I was working there at the masonry contractor's office, doing his payroll and all kinds of stuff in the office. I was the only person in the office, so I took care of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I was drafted then when I had been with him, I guess, about 2 years.
Where were you living at the time when you were
I
drafted?
was living in Lansdale, Pennsylvania, which is about 25 miles north of Philadelphia.
Were you living alone or with your parents?
I was living with my parents. Yeah.
Now we kind of touched upon it already, but I'll ask you to say again, which war did you serve in?
I served in World War II.
Okay.
And I was in European theater of operations.
Okay. Do you remember all the places you went along the way?
From the time that we left the States?
Right. Yep.
Well, as I said before, we landed in Ireland. We crossed the Atlantic
Mm-hmm.
on the Queen Elizabeth. They had converted the Queen Elizabeth and was no longer a luxury cruiser. The thing that I remember most is how crowded it was. And an ordinary stateroom that ordinarily held 2 people, they had 17 of us in there because that was the number in our cadre. In our dispersing section, there were 17 enlisted men and 3 officers. So the 17 of us, we were in layers. And me being one of the smallest guys, I was all the way up at the top of the pile. And that most of the time, you couldn't do much at all because it was so crowded. one of the jokes that they passed around was that they were going to try to find a dentist on board the ship so they'd have a chance to sit down. And because you couldn't do it otherwise, and sleeping, like I say, was in layers like that, so it wasn't very comfortable.
No.
So,
From Ireland, where did you go next?
well, from Ireland, we flew to England, and that was my first airplane ride. And since there was only 17 enlisted men and 3 officers, they got all of us on this. It was a converted B-24, and the turret in the front of the plane ordinarily had a gunner, but they took the guns out and everything, and they had 2 of us smaller guys up in the front there where the guns had been in the turret.
What do you think of that first plane ride?
Oh, I'll never forget it, because when we landed, it was the biggest thrill. That ground was coming up at us a mile a minute, and if the plane would have tipped over or something, we would have just been a grease spot along the runway. But that was better than traveling by boat, by ship. So they took us to a staging area in England, southeast England, and from there we shoved off onto the continent.
So, where did you land?
We landed on the beach at Normandy.
At Normandy.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we landed about 2 months after D-Day, but there was still a lot of what do you want to say, remembrances of what the fellows went through. It must have been hell, just trying to picture attacking. You were just an open target, and gunners all along the beach, mowing them down. And it was a terrible situation, and a lot of that came back to you as you landed, because we landed in the water the same as the fellows did that were leading the attack. And when we got to the beach part, there was some guns still laying around, some parts of guns, and all different kinds of memorabilia and everything. Nobody would touch it, or do anything, but it just brought such grim reminders of what those initial waves of fellows went through.
So you've landed in Normandy.
Mm-hmm.
What was your first assignment when you?
First assignment was to go to a place called Neufchâteau. It was in northeastern France, and that's where we traveled by truck. In the back of a truck, they had all 17 of us once again in the back of a truck, and they took us to Neufchâteau, and we were billeted there. They found an old building that they had cleaned out and everything, and all of us were in there.
What was your job at that time?
That time I was in the finance
Okay.
department section, and just working on financial matters, figuring enlisted men's pay, travel expenses, different odds and ends like that. And I also, my commanding officer and the warrant officer that was like his helper, they saw on my records that I was able to type, and I could also take shorthand because I had the commercial course in high school. And when they saw that, they used me a lot in the office for the typing. And the captain, our commanding officer, he used me quite a bit to take letters and type up correspondence that he had to take care of.
So from northeast France, where did you go next?
Well, we went on further into France, And I don't know the exact date anymore. I could look it up, but I can't think of it right offhand. But at one point, there was a directive that came out from Eisenhower's office, and things weren't going too good for the Allies at different points there. If you recall, initially they were having a rough time. And since they had so many losses in the combat areas, the combat troops, Eisenhower put out letters stating that each service company, like ours was, had to give up two general service fellows and replace them with limited service fellows that were limited as far as what they could do. And I was one of the two lucky guys that got selected, and I was sent to a replacement depot in France, and when I had been there for like 2 or 3 days, every day we had to keep looking on the bulletin board that was posted